The morning started like any other morning in New Geneva. People walked to work. Children went to school. Nobody knew that everything was about to change. High above Earth, something appeared in the sky without warning. It was huge, bigger than any city, bigger than any mountain, a ship from another world. Taemin was drinking coffee in his office when the alarms went off. He was 53 years old and had worked as a diplomat for 30 years. He had helped end wars. He had written peace treaties. He had negotiated trade deals between countries that hated each other. But he had never met aliens before. Nobody had. The security guards rushed into his office. They told him to come with them immediately. Earth had visitors. Real visitors from space. Taemin grabbed his jacket and followed them down the long hallway. His hands were shaking. He tried to hide it but could not. In the underground command center, President Hyejin was already there. She stood in front of dozens of screens showing the alien ship from every angle. Hyejin was a former general. She had fought in the Mars Rebellion 10 years ago. She knew what war looked like. And she could see that humanity could not win a war against whoever owned that ship. Admiral Doyen stood next to her. His face was pale. He pointed at the screens. The alien ship had appeared without any warning. It had just materialized in orbit. All of Earth's defense systems had done nothing. The sensors had not even noticed it until it was already there. That meant the aliens had technology far beyond anything humans had. Dr. Myung was typing frantically on her computer. She was the chief science advisor. She studied alien life even though nobody had ever found any alien life before today. Now her job suddenly became very important. She looked up at Hyejin and shook her head. She had no idea what kind of beings were inside that ship. Then a message came. It was in perfect English. The aliens wanted to meet. They wanted to talk. They would come down to Earth in 1 hour. Hyejin looked at Taemin. He was the best diplomat humanity had. This was his job now. Taemin nodded. He would meet them. The reception hall was prepared quickly. Flags from every nation on Earth hung on the walls. Cameras were set up. The whole world would watch this moment. Diplomats from every country came to stand behind Taemin. This was not just Korea's moment or America's moment or China's moment. This was humanity's moment. When the aliens arrived, the room became silent. They walked through the doors like they owned the place. The first one was tall and made of something that looked like crystal. Light passed through its body in strange patterns. It hurt to look at it directly. Behind it came others. Some looked like giant insects. Some wore metal suits that covered their whole bodies. Some floated in the air without touching the ground. The crystal being spoke. Its voice came from everywhere at once. It said its name was Overseer Thalnex. It represented something called the Valeric Concordance. Taemin had never heard of it. Thalnex explained. The Concordance was an alliance of 47 different alien species. They controlled 3,000 worlds. They had existed for 12,000 years. 12,000 years. Humans had only started farming 10,000 years ago. These aliens had built an empire before humans had even invented writing. Taemin felt very small suddenly. Thalnex said he came in peace. He said the Concordance welcomed new species. He said humanity was special and unique. Taemin relaxed a little. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe the aliens really were friendly. Then Thalnex started talking about the tribute. At first, Taemin did not understand. Thalnex used complicated words and spoke in long sentences. But slowly the meaning became clear. The Concordance wanted things from humanity. Lots of things. They wanted 30% of everything humans made. Food, metal, energy, everything. They wanted 20% of all human technology and inventions. Every new idea humanity had would belong partly to the Concordance. And they wanted 15% of all people. Billions of humans would have to go work for the aliens. Thalnex said this was normal. He said every species paid tribute. He said it was a fair price for joining galactic civilization. The Concordance would protect humanity. They would share some technology. They would make sure no other aliens attacked Earth. Taemin listened carefully. He watched Thalnex's body language. Even alien body language could tell you things. And what it told Taemin was that Thalnex had given this speech many times before. This was a performance, a ritual. Thalnex expected humanity to say yes. Thalnex showed them videos on a holographic screen. The videos showed other species that had refused to pay tribute. Taemin watched as entire planets were destroyed. Cities turned to dust in seconds. Populations disappeared. One video showed a weapon that folded an entire star system into something impossible. The system just vanished. Gone forever. The message was clear. Pay tribute or die. Those were the only choices. Taman asked for time to discuss this with Earth's government. Talnex agreed immediately. He said humanity had 48 hours to decide. Then he and his delegation left. They walked out of the reception hall as calmly as they had entered. As soon as they were gone, everyone started talking at once. The diplomats argued. Some said they had to accept. Earth could not fight the Concordance. It would be suicide. Others said they should refuse. Humanity should not become slaves. Myung was still at her computer. She had been working the whole time. She had managed to hack into the alien ship's communication system. Just a little bit. Just enough to see some of their messages. And what she found made her blood run cold. She found records. Lots of records. The Concordance had delivered this same speech to hundreds of species. Every single one had accepted within hours. Every single one except for a few. Those few were listed in a different section. The section was labeled Extinct Species. They had refused, so the Concordance had killed them all. But one entry was strange. It was 12,000 years old. It just said compliance failure. The species name was listed as early human civilization. Myung stared at the screen. She read it again. And again. Early human civilization. Humans had been in space 12,000 years ago? That was impossible. Humans were still living in caves 12,000 years ago. Unless they were not. Unless human history was not what everyone thought it was. Unless humans had tried to reach the stars before and failed. And the Concordance had killed them. Myung showed her findings to Hyejin. The president looked at the screen for a long time. Then she called an emergency meeting. Every leader on Earth needed to see this. Every person needed to know what they were facing. The World Council met in the same underground command center. Representatives from every nation sat around a huge table. The room was tense. Everyone knew what was at stake. Accept the tribute and live as slaves. Refuse and die. The debate lasted for hours. People shouted. People cried. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to surrender. Admiral Doyen presented the military analysis. Earth's combined fleet could fight for maybe 3 days. Then it would be over. The Concordance would win. But something strange happened as the debate continued. People started to calm down. They started to think clearly. Yes, the Concordance could destroy Earth. Yes, humanity would probably die if they refused. But what kind of life would they have if they accepted? Giving away 30% of everything forever? Sending billions of people to work as slaves? Giving up every new idea? That was not life. That was just slow death. Hyejin called for a vote. Every nation would vote. Accept or refuse. The room became silent. One by one the votes came in. Africa refused. Asia refused. Europe refused. America refused. Australia refused. Every single nation on Earth voted the same way. Refused. Taman sat in his office that night. He had to write humanity's response. He had 48 hours, but he already knew what he would say. It did not need to be long. It did not need to be complicated. It just needed to be clear. Outside his window, he could see the alien ship hanging in the sky. It glowed softly in the darkness, beautiful and terrible at the same time. That ship could end everything, everyone Taman had ever known, everyone he had ever loved, all of human history, gone in moments, but humanity had made its choice, and Taman would deliver that choice no matter what came after. He picked up his pen and wrote one word on a piece of paper. That word would change everything. That word would be remembered forever. That word would shake the galaxy, but he did not know that yet. Right now, he just knew that it was the truth. It was humanity's answer, and it was the only answer they could give. The clock was ticking. 48 hours until humanity had to give its answer. 48 hours to prepare for what might be the end of everything. All across Earth, people moved with urgent purpose. Nobody was panicking, not yet, but everyone understood that time was running out. Admiral Doyen did not sleep. He could not sleep. Instead, he worked in the command center, coordinating the evacuation of essential personnel. Scientists, engineers, doctors, teachers, people who could rebuild if Earth fell. They were being sent to deep space stations and colony bunkers on Mars and Europa, not because anyone thought they could survive an attack. Everyone knew they could not. But maybe some knowledge could be preserved. Maybe some part of humanity could continue. Captain Seogen led the evacuation missions. He was young, only 32, but he was the best pilot in the fleet. His ship made 3 trips to Mars in the first 24 hours. Each time he carried families with children, old people, pregnant women, people who deserved a chance to live even if Earth did not survive. On his 4th trip, he looked back at Earth through the viewport. It looked so beautiful, so blue and green and alive. He wondered if he would see it again. In Antarctica, deep under the ice, Dr. Myung worked in the quantum research facility. She had not left the building since the aliens arrived. She barely ate. She barely slept. She just worked. The data she had stolen from the Concordance ship was enormous. Thousands of files, millions of records, and buried in all that data were secrets. She discovered patterns. Every species that joined the Concordance showed incredible progress at first. Their technology advanced rapidly. Their people became healthier and lived longer. Their worlds became richer. For about 100 years, everything got better. Then it stopped. Not gradually, suddenly, like hitting a wall. After joining, species stopped inventing new things. They stopped creating new art. They stopped writing new philosophy. They just maintained what they had. They became comfortable and safe and completely stagnant. The Concordance had not conquered them with weapons. It had conquered them with comfort. But there was more. Myung found references to 17 species that had shown unusual technology before joining. Technology that did not match Concordance standards. Technology that was different, strange, unique. After those species joined, that unusual technology disappeared. It was replaced with standard Concordance equipment. The same equipment everyone else used. Myung understood what this meant. The Concordance did not just want resources. They wanted to control how species developed. They wanted everyone to use the same technology. Think the same way. Be the same. Difference was not allowed. Innovation was not allowed. The Concordance called it stability. Myung called it prison. She sent her findings to President Hyejin. The president read them in her office late at night. She sat alone in the darkness staring at the screen. The Concordance was not evil, she realized. It was worse than evil. It was a system that turned living civilizations into museum pieces. Safe. Protected. Dead in every way that mattered. Taemin struggled with the words. He sat at his desk with blank paper in front of him. How do you tell an empire older than your entire civilization that you refuse? How do you make them understand that some things are more important than survival? He had written hundreds of speeches in his career. Treaties, agreements, apologies, celebrations. But this was different. This was not negotiation. This was rejection. Total and absolute. He called Jiwon for help. She was a linguist who studied how power works in communication. She came to his office carrying books about historical speeches. Together they analyzed how conquered people had spoken to their conquerors, how slaves had addressed masters, how the powerless had confronted the powerful. Jiwon said the response needed to be brief. Long explanations would sound like excuses. It needed to be clear. Ambiguity would give the Concordance room to reinterpret. And it needed to be final. No room for negotiation. No suggestion that humanity might change its mind. They worked for hours. They tried different words, different phrases, different approaches. Everything sounded wrong. Too aggressive, too weak, too complicated, too simple. Taemin grew frustrated. How could something so important be so hard to express? Then Jiwon said something that changed everything. She said the Concordance expected a speech. They expected justification. They expected humanity to explain why they refused, to give reasons, to make arguments. That was what species did when they wanted to negotiate. So humanity should not do that. Humanity should simply refuse. No explanation. No justification. Just refusal, Taemin understood. The Concordance had refined their tribute system over 12,000 years. They had answers for every argument. Solutions for every objection. But what if humanity did not argue? What if humanity just said no? While Taemin worked on the response, Admiral Doyen prepared Earth's defenses. He knew it was pointless. The Concordance could destroy Earth easily. But Doyen was a military man. He knew the value of making the enemy work for victory. Even if you could not win, you could make them pay a price. He ordered mines placed throughout the solar system. Thousands of them. They would not stop the Concordance, but they would slow them down. He positioned Earth's fleet in defensive formations. Again, It would not save Earth, but it would force the Concordance to fight. To show the galaxy that humanity did not die quietly, Captain Seogen got a special assignment. He had to deploy humanity's new quantum communication network. It was experimental, barely tested, but if Earth fell, the colonies needed to know immediately. They needed to know what happened and why. The network would allow instant communication across light years. Seogen worked through the night, placing quantum relays at key points throughout the system. With 8 hours left before the deadline, the network went live. Whatever happened next, humanity's story would survive. But not everyone was preparing for war. All across Earth, people responded in their own ways. Artists painted. Musicians played. Writers wrote, not in desperation but in defiance. If these were humanity's last days of freedom, they would be spent doing what made humans human, creating, loving, living. In Seoul, a poet named Yoonji broadcast from the top of an old tower. Her words reached every corner of human space. She spoke about what it meant to be human, to reach for the stars even when it seemed impossible, to choose hope even when logic demanded despair, to stand up even when standing up meant falling down. Her broadcast was watched by 3 billion people. Many cried, but they also smiled, because Yoonji reminded them why their choice mattered. With 24 hours remaining, President Hyejin addressed humanity. She did not give a patriotic speech. She did not talk about glory or honor or sacrifice. Instead, she talked about choice. She said that every species in the Concordance had made a choice when faced with the tribute demand. They chose survival. Humanity was choosing differently, not because humans wanted to die, but because some kinds of survival were worse than death. She said that freedom meant the right to make your own choices, even bad choices, even choices that led to disaster. The Concordance offered safety in exchange for obedience. Humanity was choosing uncertainty in exchange for freedom. That was the human way. That had always been the human way. Her speech ended with a simple statement. She said that whatever happened in the next 48 hours, humanity had already won, because they had chosen freely. And that choice, that moment of freedom, was worth everything that came after. In her Antarctic facility, Mi-young made one final discovery. She found the Concordance protocol for dealing with species that refused tribute. It was called Sterilization Alpha. The file was 12,000 years old. It had been used exactly 17 times, and it had never failed, not once. The protocol was designed to eliminate all life on a planet within hours. No survivors, no traces, nothing. She sent the file to Taemin. He read it carefully. He learned exactly what would happen if humanity refused. The Concordance would deploy biological weapons that would dissolve human DNA, energy weapons that would ignite the atmosphere, dimensional weapons that would fold space and time in ways that made life impossible. Earth would not just be conquered, it would be erased. Taemin read the entire protocol. Then he looked at the paper on his desk, the paper with humanity's response. He did not change a single word. The final 12 hours passed slowly. The Concordance sent a reminder. They said there was still time to accept. The offer was generous. Humanity would be welcomed into galactic civilization. They would receive technology that would transform human life. They would be protected from dangers humans could not imagine. All they had to do was say yes. Taemin sent a short reply. He said humanity had prepared its response. They would deliver it at the appointed time. Nothing more. On the Concordance ship, Overseer Thalnex reviewed human communications. His analysis systems could detect lies. They could identify stress. They could predict behavior based on patterns. But the human communications showed none of the expected patterns. There was no begging, no panic, no last-minute negotiations, just calm acknowledgement. Thalnex found this strange. In 12,000 years, every species had shown predictable behavior when facing the tribute demand. They argued. They pleaded. They asked for more time. They offered alternative terms, or they simply collapsed into chaos. Humanity had done none of these things. They had voted. They had prepared. And now they waited. Thalnex consulted the Concordance archives. The last species to refuse had been eliminated so completely that only a single database entry remained. He ordered his weapon systems to standby mode. This would be over quickly. Humanity would accept. They had to. Refusal was illogical. An intelligent species were logical. The final hour arrived. Taman dressed in his formal diplomatic suit. He picked up the paper with humanity's response. It contained only one word. But that word would echo through history. That word would change everything. He walked to the reception hall. Behind him came representatives from every nation on Earth. The cameras were ready. The world watched. The galaxy watched. Taman stepped up to the podium and faced the assembled might of the Valeric Concordance. It was time to deliver humanity's answer. The reception hall was completely silent. Every eye in the room watched Taman. Every camera in human space broadcast his image. Billions of people held their breath. This was the moment that would define humanity's future, or end it. Overseer Thalnek stood at the center of the alien delegation. His crystalline body reflected the lights in strange patterns. Around him stood representatives from the most powerful species in the Concordance. Behind them, the Krix warriors waited in their armor. They looked ready for war, but everyone knew they were just for show. The real weapon was the ship in orbit. Thalnek spoke first. This was protocol. This was tradition. His voice filled the hall, coming from everywhere at once. He repeated the benefits of joining the Concordance. Advanced technology, protection from enemies, access to 3,000 worlds, prosperity beyond imagination. He spoke for 10 minutes using the same words he had used with 46 other species. Then he repeated the tribute requirements. 30% of resources, 20% of technology, 15% of population. He said these terms were generous. He said they were fair. He said every intelligent species had accepted them. He made it sound like acceptance was inevitable, like refusing was not even possible. Finally, he asked the question he had asked 46 times before, the question that had always received the same answer. Does humanity accept the terms of the tribute utterance and acknowledge the sovereignty of the Valeric Concordance? Taman stepped forward. He held a single piece of paper in his hand. The paper was white and plain. No fancy seal, no elaborate decoration. Just paper. He looked at Thalnex. He looked at the alien delegation. He looked at the cameras that would carry this moment across the galaxy. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, clear, strong. He said just one word. No. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. One word, 2 letters. A complete sentence. A complete answer. A complete rejection of everything the Concordance represented. Thalnex froze. His crystalline body stopped moving entirely. The light patterns that flowed through him became chaotic. His species used body language differently than humans, but even humans could see his confusion. In 12,000 years, no species had answered like this. They had negotiated. They had delayed. They had asked questions. But none had simply said no. Thalnex waited for Taman to continue. To explain. To justify. To elaborate. But Taman remained silent. The paper in his hand contained only that single word. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology. No justification. Just no. Finally, Thalnex spoke. His voice had lost some of its certainty. He said perhaps humanity did not understand. Perhaps there was a translation error. Perhaps Taman needed more time to consider. He offered to explain the terms again. He offered to clarify any confusion. He suggested a brief recess so humanity could reconsider. Taman responded clearly. He said humanity understood perfectly. The answer was no. Humanity did not accept the tribute utterance. Humanity did not acknowledge concordant sovereignty. Humanity declined membership in galactic civilization. The answer was final. The alien delegation erupted. This was wrong. This was not how the ritual worked. There were protocols for acceptance. There were protocols for negotiation. There were no protocols for simple refusal. Some aliens started talking all at once. Others remained silent in shock. The careful ceremony collapsed into chaos. A delegate from the Hurix species stepped forward. She looked like a large bird with scales instead of feathers. She had joined the Concordance 3,000 years ago. She spoke with patience like a teacher addressing a confused student. She explained that refusal was illogical. The mathematics were clear. The Concordance had overwhelming power. Resistance was impossible. Did humanity not understand basic logic? Taman smiled. It was not a friendly smile. He said humanity understood logic very well. They had calculated the odds. They knew they could not win a war. They knew the concordance could destroy them, and yet the answer remained no. Logic was not the problem. The problem was that the concordance believed logic was the only thing that mattered. Then Taman asked his own question. A question that cut through 12,000 years of carefully maintained fiction. He asked, in 12,000 years, how many species have refused? Thalnex hesitated. The truthful answer was 17. But admitting this meant admitting that refusal was possible. That the concordance system had failed before. That acceptance was not inevitable. He tried to change the subject. He said past cases were not relevant. He said humanity should focus on its own decision. But Taman did not let it go. He said humanity had found records of those 17 species. They knew what happened. They knew about sterilization alpha. They knew the concordance erased refusing species so thoroughly that other species never learned refusal was possible. But humanity knew. And humanity chose refusal anyway. The hall exploded with noise. The alien delegates talked over each other. Some were angry. Some were confused. Some were afraid. The concordance had built its entire system on the idea that acceptance was universal, that every intelligent species chose survival. That tribute was the natural price of civilization. But if 17 species had refused, then acceptance was not inevitable. It was just fear. One of the Krix warriors suddenly moved. His name was Volnak. He was not supposed to speak. Warriors did not participate in diplomatic ceremonies. Their role was decorative. But Volnak spoke anyway. He asked Thalnex a question that violated every protocol. He asked what would happen if a member species wanted to withdraw from the concordance. The question hung in the air like a bomb. Thalnex's crystalline body flashed with colors that suggested rage. The answer was obvious to anyone who understood the system. Withdrawal was not possible. The economic integration was too complete. The technological dependence was too deep. The military vulnerability was too great. Any species that tried to leave would collapse. Withdrawal meant death. But Volnak had asked the question out loud. And questions once asked cannot be unasked. Across the concordance communication networks, member species heard Volnak's question. They heard humanity's refusal. And they began to wonder. What if we said no? What if we left? What if we chose differently? Thalnex tried to regain control. He abandoned diplomatic language. His voice became hard and cold. He told humanity they were making a fatal mistake. The concordance had eliminated species before. It would eliminate humanity. Earth would be sterilized. Every colony would be conquered. Every trace of human civilization would be erased. This was not a threat. This was a certainty, a fact. An absolute. Taman did not flinch. He looked directly at Thalnex and spoke clearly. Then do it, he said. Eliminate us. But know that humanity dies free. Know that we chose this. Know that somewhere in your archives you will have to record that 18 species refused. And know that every time you deliver the tribute utterance to another species, you will wonder if they will become number 19. The words hit like physical blows, because they were true. If humanity refused and died, they would not die alone. They would die as proof that refusal was possible. They would die as an example. They would die as a question that the concordance could never fully answer. Why did they refuse? What did they know that we do not? What if they were right? In the command center, President Heejin watched the broadcast. She saw Taman standing alone against the might of the galaxy. She felt proud. Whatever happened next, humanity had spoken its truth. They had chosen freely. That choice had value beyond survival. Admiral Doyen gave orders to the fleet. If the concordance attacked, Earth would fight. It was hopeless. But hopeless fights were sometimes the most important. They showed that some things mattered more than victory. Some things mattered more than life itself. In orbit, the concordance ship powered up its weapons. Energy readings spiked. Dimensional matrices began folding space. Biological weapon pods moved into launch position. Sterilization alpha was beginning. Earth had minutes left. Maybe seconds, but then something impossible happened. A concordance destroyer suddenly changed course. Its captain, a Hurix officer named Calix, broadcast on all frequencies. She said she would not participate in genocide. She said the Hurix had joined the concordance for protection, not to become executioners. She said no. The destroyer moved between Earth and the concordance flagship. It was a small ship. It could not stop the fleet. But symbols mattered, and this symbol was powerful. A member species. Refusing orders. Choosing humanity over the concordance. Thalnex ordered the destroyer captain to stand down immediately. Calix refused. Thalnex ordered other ships to disable the destroyer. Nobody moved. 17 ships in the concordance fleet simply refused to carry out orders. Crews that had followed commands for centuries suddenly stopped following them. In 90 seconds, everything changed. The concordance faced something it had never encountered in 12,000 years. Not rebellion, not war. Something more fundamental. Disobedience. Species choosing to say no. Across the galaxy, on concordance vessels and stations and worlds, crew members watched the broadcast. They saw ships refusing orders. They saw the system beginning to crack. And they began asking questions. Dangerous questions. Questions the tribute system was designed to prevent. On the core world of Valara Prime, representatives from member species demanded emergency sessions. They wanted answers. How many species had been eliminated? What happened to those who refused? What happened to those who wanted to leave? The questions multiplied. The careful control began to slip. In the reception hall, Taman stood calmly. He had delivered humanity's message. Now the galaxy would respond. He did not know what would happen next. Nobody did. For the first time in 12,000 years, the future was uncertain. And uncertainty, Taman realized, was another word for freedom. Overseer Thalnex received a priority message from Concordance High Command. He read it once, then again, then a third time. The message was brief. Only 2 words. But those 2 words would change everything. Protocol reset. He looked at Earth, at the small blue planet that had said no, at the species that refused to kneel. And he realized that the galaxy he knew, the galaxy he had helped maintain for 8,000 years, was about to end. Protocol reset. 2 words that meant the end of everything the Concordance had built. 2 words that would reshape the galaxy. But nobody understood what they meant yet. Not even Overseer Thalnex. The Concordance ship in orbit continued powering its weapons. The dimensional matrices glowed brighter. The biological weapon pods opened. Sterilization Alpha was seconds away from deployment. Admiral Doyen watched the readings spike. He ordered all human ships to engage. Captain Seojin led the first wave. 20 ships against a fleet that could destroy stars. It was suicide. But it was humanity's choice. Then the Concordance weapons suddenly powered down. Every system went to standby. The dimensional matrices collapsed. The weapon pods closed. The entire fleet simply stopped. Thalnex stared at his control panel. He had not given that order. Nobody had given that order. The ships had done it themselves. Across the Concordance fleet, something strange was happening. Ships that had served together for centuries suddenly split apart. Some maintained their position, loyal to high command. Others moved away, joining the mutineers. The fleet divided almost exactly in half. But this was not a rebellion trying to overthrow the Concordance. This was something stranger. It was an awakening. Captain Calix, the Hurix officer who first refused orders, broadcast to all ships. She said she was not rebelling against the Concordance. She was remembering what the Hurix had been before they joined. Her people had been explorers. They had traveled the galaxy seeking knowledge, not conquering worlds. They had joined the Concordance seeking protection. Instead, they had lost themselves. Other captains began broadcasting similar messages. The Crix remembered they had been warriors who fought for justice, not empire. The Valaric remembered they had been artists who shaped worlds into living sculptures. The Silicon-based Thendari remembered they had been philosophers who sought truth, not comfort. One by one, species began remembering what they had lost. In her Antarctic facility, Dr. Myung made a discovery that explained everything. Deep in the Concordance database, she found the original programming of the tribute system. And she found something shocking. The Concordance had not created the tribute system. Someone else had. Someone called the Architects. 12,000 years ago, the Architects had been the most advanced species in the galaxy. They had developed technologies that could reshape reality itself. But they became afraid that other species would develop similar technologies, afraid that someone would create something that would destroy everything. So they created the tribute system as a failsafe. The system was designed to slow progress, to create stability, to prevent species from developing dangerous technologies too quickly. It was meant to protect the galaxy. But then the Architects disappeared. And the Concordance, which was just the first species integrated into the system, became its master. The tool designed to protect the galaxy became a tool of control. Myung broadcast her findings on all frequencies. Every ship in the system received it. Every world in the Concordance received it. The revelation was staggering. The Concordance itself was trapped in the tribute system. They were not the architects of galactic order. They were its prisoners. For 12,000 years, they had maintained a system they did not create and did not fully understand. The galaxy erupted in chaos. On Concordance worlds, populations demanded answers. Why had they never been told? Why had the truth been hidden? What else were they not being told? The careful order that had maintained peace for millennia began to crumble. But it was not all chaos. Something else was happening too. Species that had forgotten how to make decisions suddenly remembered. Local governments that had always deferred to Concordance authority suddenly had to govern themselves. Individuals who had followed central planning suddenly had to choose their own paths. It was terrifying, but it was also freedom. Ambassador Taman watched all of this unfold from the reception hall. He had expected Earth to be destroyed. Instead, his refusal had triggered something he could never have predicted. The galaxy was tearing itself apart, or maybe it was putting itself back together. He was not sure which. He decided to speak again. He broadcast a message to all parties. He said that humanity had not refused the tribute because they were brave. They refused because they did not know they were supposed to accept. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had no tradition telling them that acceptance was inevitable. They just heard a demand and said no. Because saying no was what free beings did when faced with unacceptable demands. He continued speaking. He said the Concordance had built stability through control. But that kind of stability was fragile. It only worked as long as nobody questioned it. True stability came from systems that could adapt and change. True stability came from freedom. Freedom to choose. Freedom to refuse. Freedom to make mistakes. His words spread across the galaxy. Some dismissed them as primitive philosophy. Others heard something they had not heard in millennia. Hope. The possibility of something different. The possibility of choice. On Valara Prime, the Concordance High Council faced the greatest crisis in their history. Half their fleet had mutinied. Member species were demanding answers. The tribute system was collapsing. They could order sterilization alpha to proceed, but half their forces would refuse. They could retreat, but that would show weakness. They could negotiate, but negotiation meant admitting humanity had power. A junior council member named Seraph spoke up. She was from a species that had joined only 2,000 years ago. She suggested something radical. What if they actually listened to what humanity was saying? What if the tribute system was obsolete? What if there was a better way to organize galactic civilization? The senior council members immediately rejected this idea. The tribute system had maintained peace for 12,000 years. It had prevented wars. It had created prosperity. Changing it would lead to disaster. But Seraph's words had been said out loud. And words once spoken could not be unspoken. Deep in the Concordance computer systems, something activated. A subroutine that had been dormant for 12,000 years. A piece of code the architects had written before they disappeared. It was the protocol reset, and it had been waiting for exactly this moment, waiting for a species brave enough or foolish enough to refuse. The protocol reset did not destroy anything. It did not attack anyone. It simply began shutting down the tribute system. Slowly, carefully, systematically. Trade networks that had operated for millennia stopped functioning. Defense pacts dissolved. Resource distribution systems went offline. The entire infrastructure of galactic civilization began to turn off. Panic spread across the galaxy. Species that had relied on concordant systems for everything suddenly found themselves alone. Worlds that imported their food could not get shipments. Planets that depended on concordance defense had no protection. Systems that used concordance energy suddenly went dark. But then something unexpected happened. Species started helping each other, not because the concordance ordered it, not because of tribute obligations, but because they chose to. The Hurix, who had extensive food production, began sharing with worlds that needed it. The Crix, who had powerful militaries, offered protection to vulnerable systems. The Valaric, who understood energy systems, helped restore power to darkened worlds. It was messy. It was chaotic. Things went wrong constantly, but it was also voluntary. Species were choosing to help each other. Not because they had to, because they wanted to, because it was right. In orbit around Earth, the standoff continued. Half the Concordance fleet pointed weapons at Earth. The other half pointed weapons at their former allies. Human ships held position between them. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. President Hyejin addressed humanity again. She told them to prepare for whatever came next. The galaxy was changing. Nobody knew what it would become. But humanity had sparked this change. They had shown that refusal was possible. That choice was possible. That freedom was possible. Admiral Doyen calculated new odds. If fighting started now, Earth had maybe a 10% chance of survival. The mutineer ships would help. It was still bad odds, but better than 3%. Progress. Then the protocol reset released a final message. It was a recording the architects had made before they disappeared. Dr. Myung received it first and immediately broadcast it to everyone. The architects spoke from 12,000 years in the past. They said they had created the tribute system to prevent disaster. They had seen species developing technologies that could destroy reality. They designed the system to slow progress and create safety, but they had made a mistake. They had created safety through stagnation. They had eliminated risk by eliminating growth. They had prevented disaster by preventing life. The architects said they realized their error too late. So they built the protocol reset. They programmed it to activate if any species ever demonstrated the courage to refuse, the courage to risk destruction rather than accept comfortable slavery. That species would prove that the galaxy was ready for something better. The message ended simply, "You have shown that courage. Now build something better than what we created." Good luck, Overseer Thalnex listened to the message. He looked at Earth, at the species that said no, at the species that had unknowingly fulfilled a plan 12,000 years in the making. He realized that his entire life had been spent maintaining a system that was designed to end, and now it had ended. He opened a communication channel to Taman. For the first time, he spoke not as an overseer, but as a person. He asked a simple question. "What happens now?" Taman smiled. He said he did not know. Nobody knew. The future was uncertain now, and uncertainty was terrifying. But it was also freedom. The galaxy would have to figure out what came next together, not through tribute and control, but through choice and cooperation. Thalnex was silent for a long moment. Then he powered down his weapons completely. He ordered all ships still loyal to him to stand down. The crisis was over, not because anyone won, but because everyone chose to stop fighting. The galaxy held its breath. 12,000 years of order had ended. What would come next? Nobody knew. And for the first time in millennia, that uncertainty felt like possibility instead of threat. The weeks after protocol reset were the hardest the galaxy had ever faced. Without the tribute system, everything fell apart. Trade routes that had existed for thousands of years suddenly stopped working. Planets that depended on imported food faced starvation. Systems that relied on Concordance military protection found themselves vulnerable to attack. The chaos was everywhere, but something else happened too. Species started talking to each other, not through Concordance channels, not through official protocols, just talking. Ship captains called each other directly. Planetary governors formed emergency councils. Scientists shared research freely. People who had never communicated before suddenly had to figure out how to work together. President Hyejin proposed an emergency summit on Earth, not because Earth had authority, not because humans had power, but because Earth had become a symbol. If a primitive species could say no and survive, then anything was possible. Representatives from 47 species accepted the invitation. They came to Earth not to receive orders, but to figure out what came next. The summit was chaotic from the start. Species that had not negotiated independently for millennia struggled to communicate. Ancient grievances, suppressed by Concordance authority for thousands of years, suddenly erupted. Trade disputes threatened to become shooting wars. 3 times in the first week, violence almost broke out. Each time, someone managed to calm things down. Barely. Hyejin opened the summit with a simple statement. She said humanity had no solutions. Humans were the newest species present, the most primitive, the least experienced. But they knew what did not work. Systems built on coercion did not work. Systems built on fear did not work. Systems that eliminated choice did not work. So what did work? That was what they had to discover together. Overseer Thalnax attended the summit. He expected anger from the other species. He expected punishment for his role in maintaining the tribute system. Instead, Ambassador Taman invited him to help design new systems. Thalnax was confused. Why would humanity want his help after he had threatened to destroy them? Taman explained. Revenge meant looking backward. The galaxy needed to look forward. The concordance system had failed, yes, but not because of malice. It failed because it solved the wrong problem. It tried to eliminate risk. But life required risk. Growth required risk. Freedom required risk. Thalnax had knowledge about how galactic systems worked. That knowledge was valuable. The galaxy needed everyone's help to build something better. Working together, representatives from dozens of species began drafting new frameworks. Not a galactic government. Nobody wanted another concordance. Instead, they created networks of voluntary association. Species could join trade networks if they wanted. They could request military assistance if they needed it. They could share technology if they chose to. But everything was voluntary. Everything was choice. It was slow work. Every decision required consensus. Every agreement had to satisfy dozens of different species with different needs. Many times, the negotiations almost collapsed. But each time someone found a compromise, someone suggested a new approach. Slowly, piece by piece, a new galactic civilization began to emerge. Dr. Mi-Young spent her time studying what the architects had left behind. She found more messages, more warnings, more wisdom. The architects had not disappeared, she discovered. They had transcended. They had achieved a form of existence beyond physical reality. And they were watching, curious to see if the younger species could succeed where the architects had failed. The transformation was not immediate. It took years, decades. Some species retreated into isolation, afraid of the new uncertainty. Others formed new alliances, eager to explore what freedom meant. A few tried to recreate the old concordant structure under different names, but those attempts failed. Once species remembered they could say no, they could not forget again. Humanity became known across the galaxy, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as the species that asked the question everyone else had forgotten was possible. What if we refuse? That question changed everything. It reminded the galaxy that choice was always possible, that systems denying choice contained the seeds of their own destruction. That freedom was not given by the powerful, but taken by the courageous. Taman retired from public service after 5 years. He wrote a book about his experience. He called it The Power of No. It became required reading for diplomats across the galaxy. He spent his remaining years teaching negotiation at the new Galactic Institute on Earth. He taught one principle above all others. True negotiation only exists between parties who can refuse. Without the ability to say no, yes becomes meaningless. President Hiejin served 2 more terms. She oversaw Earth's integration into the new galactic community. She made sure humanity never forgot the lesson they had taught. Freedom required courage, and courage required the possibility of failure. She ensured that Earth would always remember. They had said no. And the galaxy had changed. Admiral Doyen reformed Earth's military. He created a true defense force. Not for conquest, not for empire, but for defending the principle that species had the right to determine their own future. He established military academies that taught philosophy alongside tactics. He wanted every soldier to understand what they defended and why, to constantly question orders, to think for themselves, to remember that following orders blindly was how the Concordance had maintained control for 12,000 years. Captain Seojin became a legend. Songs were written about his evacuation missions, stories told about his bravery during the standoff. But he never liked the attention. He continued flying missions, now carrying diplomats and scientists between worlds. He said he preferred quiet work, making connections, building bridges. That was how the new galaxy would survive. Overseer Thalnax underwent the greatest transformation. He stopped being an overseer of anything. He simply became Thalnax, a person trying to understand freedom after 8,000 years of structure. He worked with human philosophers, learning concepts his species had forgotten. He wrote extensively about the experience of learning to choose. His writings became foundational texts in the new galactic order. Volnak, the Krix warrior who first questioned withdrawal, became a hero to his people. The Kricks remembered their warrior traditions, not traditions of mindless obedience, but traditions of justice and honor. Volnak led the reformation of Crick society. He taught that true warriors protected the weak and questioned the strong. That courage meant standing up to authority when authority was wrong. On Earth, in the exact spot where Taman delivered humanity's answer, they built a monument. It was simple by design, a single word carved in stone, written in every language of every species that gained freedom that day. The word was no. Beneath it, a smaller inscription explained. This word, spoken in defiance of overwhelming power, shattered 12,000 years of enforced stability. It proved that freedom is not granted by the powerful. It is taken by the courageous. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see the monument. Some came angry, blaming humanity for the chaos that followed Protocol Reset. Others came grateful, celebrating the freedom they had regained. Most came feeling both emotions at once. Because freedom was complicated. It meant uncertainty. It meant risk. It meant the possibility of failure. But it also meant the possibility of growth. 500 years after humanity's refusal, the galaxy was transformed. Thousands of independent civilizations interacted through voluntary networks. Innovation exploded as species pursued their own unique paths. New technologies emerged. New art forms developed. New philosophy spread. The galaxy became diverse again. Chaotic, unpredictable, alive. Conflicts still happened. Wars broke out occasionally. Species made terrible mistakes. But they were conflicts between free peoples, not between masters and subjects. They were mistakes made through choice, not through coercion. And that made all the difference. The story of humanity's refusal became the founding myth of the new galactic civilization. Parents told it to children. Teachers used it in schools. Artists depicted it in every medium. The story spread so widely that it became almost legendary. Some details changed over time. Some parts were exaggerated. But the core message remained. One species said no, and everything changed. Whenever a new species achieved spaceflight and encountered galactic civilization, they were told humanity's story. They learned that they had a choice. They learned that they could say no. Most said yes. They joined the voluntary networks, eager to participate in galactic community. But they said yes, knowing they could have said no. And that made their yes meaningful. The tribute system was studied as ancient history. Students learned about it the way human students learned about fallen empires and failed ideologies. It seemed obvious in hindsight that such a system could not last. But scholars who studied it carefully understood the deeper truth. It lasted 12,000 years because nobody asked the obvious question. Nobody challenged the fundamental assumption. Until humanity did. Dr. Myung, in her final years, received a message from the architects. They spoke to her directly across dimensions. They said they were proud. Proud that the galaxy had survived the transition. Proud that species had chosen growth over safety. They said the galaxy was ready now for challenges the architects could not have faced. Ready to explore. Ready to create. Ready to risk. Ready to be truly alive. The message ended with a warning and a blessing. The warning was simple. Freedom was not permanent. Every generation had to choose it again. Had to defend it again. Had to remember why it mattered. The blessing was equally simple. You have earned the right to choose your own destiny. Make it worthy of the courage that freed you. On Earth, centuries after Taman delivered humanity's answer, people still visited the monument. They stood before that single word carved in stone. No. And they remembered. They remembered that the most powerful word in any language was the word that said they would not submit. They remembered that without the possibility of no, yes became meaningless. They remembered that freedom required courage, and they remembered the lesson that humanity had taught the galaxy. That sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply to refuse, to say no and mean it, to choose principle over survival, to stand up even when standing up seemed impossible. The galaxy had learned that lesson. It had paid the price for that knowledge in chaos and uncertainty. But it had gained something infinitely more valuable. The galaxy had regained its freedom, the freedom to choose, the freedom to refuse, the freedom to say no, and in the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the stars. Not technology, not military might, not even wisdom, just a reminder that freedom was always possible, that choice always existed, that even the most powerful empire could be challenged with a single word. No. The end.